emergency that's happening in Boston, Medford actually now. And it's worth pointing out that in all the uproar over the Trump administration's undermining of democratic rights and free speech, that Israel is at the center of it, is the cutting edge, effectively. And it's not just that for those of us who care about Palestine and oppose Israel's policy, it's everybody who cares about free speech and democracy in this country that should be rising up and standing up against Israel-inspired repression at our universities, among our immigrants, and in every area where people potentially can speak up and face punishment. The driving force, the cutting edge, is Israel, as is also true of much of the U.S. military involvement, especially in the Middle East, which for a generation has been cheered on by Israel and its supporters in the United States under the assumption that any U.S. war in the Middle East is good for Israel. And that goes back to the various Iraq wars, and more recently, intervention in Syria, Lebanon, and now, of course, in Yemen. And it's shameful that there is this giant hullabaloo about alleged, security lapses in the use of the Signal app from Democrats who are, grilling Trump officials in Congress and so on, but they never mention or address the fact that the U.S. is carrying out an illegal bombing and attack on Yemen, a country with which we are not at war, but Israel is effectively at war with them. And so just bear in mind that, Israel, a foreign country, and its adherents in the United States are driving very nefarious developments in our country, domestically and abroad. And that should be a lesson to the wider movement, the wider anti-Trump movement, that their enemy is not just Trump, but the influence on the Trump administration and the U.S. at large of Israel and its supporters in the interest of a foreign country. So obviously, we need to talk about Gaza first. Since Israel broke the ceasefire, it has bombed Gaza daily and has lately launched a larger scale ground invasion of Gaza, where they are openly talking about permanently or long-term occupation of much of Gaza, which is already a tiny, tiny place, and are driving the population from sort of one end of the Gaza Strip to another, attacking simultaneously in the north and in the south. And it's important to note, especially since the Israeli government officials are not shy about this at all, that genocide in Gaza is not a matter of collateral damage as it fights Hamas. It is a feature of Israel's intervention in Gaza. They say so daily, that their intent and their actions are to destroy everything they can destroy in Gaza, make it unlivable, and drive the population out. That's the aim of Israel's war. It's not a war against Hamas. It's a war against the 2 million Palestinians who live in Gaza. And of course, both Democratic and Republican administrations, Biden and Trump, have been complicit in this genocidal aim. Again, it's not collateral. It's the intention. It's the aim of this attack on Gaza, not an accident, or as the software people say, it's a feature, not a bug of Israel's policy in Gaza. You may have seen just recently, they blew up the only specialized cancer hospital in Gaza. It was empty because it had been occupied by Israeli armed forces, again, as a war crime. And as they left it, they blew it up. It's their intention to destroy every bit of infrastructure in Gaza that they can lay their hands on and make it unlivable. Speaking of hospitals, They also attacked the Nasser hospital in the southern part of Gaza in an effort, as they say, to assassinate a Hamas official who was being treated in the emergency room for his injuries that were, occurred when a tent encampment near the hospital was bombed. Now, this is a war crime by anybody's estimation. It's a war crime to attack a hospital, and it's a war crime to assassinate a combatant, even if he was a combatant, who is out of action, who is under medical treatment. This is a classic war crime. Hospitals are off limits, and killing combatants who are wounded and out of combat is also a war crime. But you wouldn't know this from the way it was reported. Because he was being treated in this hospital, the Israelis and their echo chamber in the United States claim that Hamas was based in the hospital. In fact, this wounded man was based in the ICU at the hospital. And to kill him, they also killed 4 or 5 other patients and medical personnel as well. So there have been reports lately that the Trump administration has been putting pressure on Middle Eastern countries to accept the Palestinians who are driven out of Gaza. And there's even a report that Egypt, which is very dependent on U.S. military aid, has agreed tentatively to accept as many as 500,000 people from Gaza in the Sinai, essentially in concentration camps in the Sinai. There's been pressure on Somalia and Syria also to accept Palestinians driven out of Gaza. And, none of this is news to any of you, I suppose. But if you read the mainstream press, as I do, not for information, but to see what they're saying, you can forgive the average person in the United States for being utterly confused. The simple fact that Israel reneged on an agreement it had signed and broke the ceasefire is almost nowhere to be found in the mainstream reporting about this. Instead, they're framing that somehow Hamas, broke negotiations to change the ceasefire agreement and extend it to allow Israel to get more of its prisoners without moving out of the Gaza Strip, which was what the ceasefire agreement demanded. People are confused, and I don't blame them for being confused. It's very hard to follow from our press coverage, which of course also, promotes and spotlights Israeli casualties, but almost casually ignores the dozens of Palestinians that are killed every day in Gaza and the tens of thousands that are being forced from their homes, perhaps outside of Gaza and perhaps permanently. In the West Bank, the settlers, backed up by the Israeli army, have been routinely attacking rural Palestinian villages, again, almost rarely reported in our press, except that they attacked and took prisoner the wounded one of the directors of the film No Other Land, Hamdan Bilal, and that got a little bit of coverage. But again, it would be confusing. They report clashes. In fact, of course, settlers attacked the village where Bilal was living, which is one of the places spotlighted in the film, injured him, and then the Israeli army, instead of arresting the perpetrators, took him out of an ambulance and arrested him, which is what generally happens when settlers attack rural communities. They arrest the victims rather than the perpetrators. The widespread destruction continues, especially in Tulkarm and Jenin, and the Jordan Valley, what remains of Palestinian homes and settlements in the Jordan Valley, is gradually being squeezed out as Israel, whatever the legality of annexation, is pursuing de facto annexation and has no intention of leaving the Jordan Valley, which is along the border of the river that divides it from the West Bank from Jordan. I guess I'll leave it at that. there is a lot going on, and it's hard to keep track of it all, but it's enough for now.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Questions and comments? Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Always excellent reprise of what's going on. I just felt we really tend to miss opportunities by not underlining the resistance in Israel to the lack of a ceasefire. It seems like that's another area that we could really develop because it seems like an awful lot of people that are in the streets every day. I was amazed they not. I my talk. I understand they looking at possibly a general strike and maybe the labor unions might join in again. But it just strikes me as another area that the anti-war people like us ought to be developing more than we have been. We tend to clump Israel. Okay, that's the Israel government, settler influenced government or dominated. But there's so many Israelis that are definitely want an end to this and back to the ceasefire, back to the agreement, because obviously they want the hostages back. So to me, that's like an opportunity lost. I'll leave it at that. So.
Yeah, I mean, there are some very brave Israeli Jews that stand up for Palestinians. They are a relative fringe of Israeli Jewish society, but some of them were injured as well in that attack that where Hamdan Bilal was arrested. But the large disagreements that you're talking about in Israeli society are mostly tactical rather than strategic. That is, some Israelis want to focus primarily on freeing the hostages and perhaps then carrying out the military destruction of Gaza. Others, like the government, are prioritize killing Palestinians, including killing hostages or prisoners, many of whom have been killed by Israeli armed forces already. So I'm afraid, and even Israeli progressives who are fighting against this government's policies recognize that there's no option for serious change within Israeli society. They themselves, the decent Israelis, say that only pressure from outside can make any difference. So we should applaud Israelis that are on the right side, but they are few and marginal in that society, and we shouldn't have illusions about that.
Thanks. Zarina.
Yeah, I have a question on I seen in Bet Letia some Hamas protests going on. I heard in Al Jazeera today, Beit Lahia. Um, and also I read something about the Fatwa wants to take over, and since they're really the Western society is so anti-Hamas, but Fatah is really not has not been respected in the past. And I was just wondering what your views are. Should that happen? Would that make anything happen better? I doubt it because this thing has gone on for a long time. But I think you're correct. It's on Israel, but Israel needs some push from somebody else, and our leadership is lacking that.
There were some reports about up to several hundred protesters in the northern part of Gaza that supposedly were demonstrating against Hamas. It may be true or maybe not. It certainly has been trumpeted very broadly in the Israeli press. It's not surprising. I mean, no one should think that any society is unanimous. And it's not surprising that there might be some people in Gaza that put the blame on Hamas following the Israeli narrative rather than on the people that are bombing them. But there's no evidence to me that there is a widespread animosity toward Hamas. And on the contrary, most people in Gaza seem to regard them as heroic resistance fighters. So, of course, people in Gaza are suffering unimaginably. And it's not surprising, would not be surprising if some of them are expressing desperation to surrender and ask for mercy from the Israelis, or even some number that, if they were allowed to, might want to leave. We can't blame them. People who have been under bombs and attacks for a year and a half. The idea that they might want to save themselves and their families by leaving, even knowing that they may never be allowed back, is understandable. We should view that with sympathy. But no way, when people, even people who desire to leave Gaza, no way is this voluntary, emigration. When people flee under bombs, it's not voluntary. It's coerced, and it's ethnic cleansing.
I forgot I have a third portion to that question. Sinai, Egypt's portion, that is nervous about taking in Palestinians because they feel that they're going to be bombed and Israel's just going to go after that land too again. At least what I've heard. I don't know if you have.
Israel is in violation of its own treaty with Egypt in occupying the Rafah area of southern Gaza and the Rafah crossing, which they are forbidden to do according to their peace treaty with Egypt. So again, the news is being manipulated, and our understanding is very clouded by the poor press coverage. But Egypt is a relatively poor country, its regime is dependent on U.S. military aid, and of course they can be influenced. So I certainly the people in all the countries around Palestine and Israel are sympathetic to the Palestinians. Their governments, none of them are democracies in any sense of the word. Their governments may be acting according to their interests, but there's no popular, support for U.S. policy and Israeli policy in the Middle East, anywhere in the Middle East.
Thank you. Pat? Pat, you there?
Sorry. So I have a question for Jeff, but first I just want to mention, since we're talking about the Sinai, that although I haven't been there for a long time, aside from where Mount Sinai is, and there's like a town around there, it's mostly just barren desert. Plenty of places to dump people without endangering Egyptians. At least that's my memory of my observation being in several different parts of Sinai. But my question for Jeff is, I read in more than one place about the extent of the split in Israel, that people talking about civil war. I don't think they're talking about armed civil war, but talking about the dissolution of Israel as it is. And I know people are saying that this is going to be the end. This could do in Israel. But have you heard anything about, or can you elaborate about this civil war that people are talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think civil war is an exaggerated way of looking at it. There is a serious divide in Israeli society, not primarily with respect to the Palestinians, but with respect to the government and it's the parties that belong to it. So, there are a lot of contradictions within Israeli society, and there are lots of reports of weakening economy, reluctance to serve, and so on. But I don't think we've seen anything. And of course, demonstrations. The demonstrations are not against the genocide in Gaza. It's for a policy that prioritizes the release of the remaining prisoners. So there is very little support for even a two-state solution among the Jewish population of Israel at this point. So they have a civil war based on secular religious divides, and party loyalties. But there is pretty much unanimity among the Jewish population to deny Palestinians any future in their land. Even a two-state solution has a very small amount of support now it's, of course, officially opposed by the government, but not supported by any large part of the Jewish population of Israel now.
Okay, great. Margaret.
So Jeff, you mentioned Egypt and Syria as possibly, well, they're being pressured. to possibly take in Palestinians. So in regards to Egypt, how can they, can you comment on how they would be able to sustain an influx of Palestinians? And with regard to Syria, I'm totally really like a newbie on this, but isn't it extremely a dangerous option for Palestinians to go into Syria?
Yes. Well, I mean, obviously, if behind the scenes, the arm twisting toward Egypt includes the carrot of funding, both the Egyptian government and for supporting Palestinian refugee camps or concentration camps in Sinai. So certainly, no one is assuming that the Egyptian government is going to bear the burden of supporting Palestinian refugees. Money is being dangled there. And in Syria, the U.S. is, there are reports that the U.S. is considering loosening sanctions against the Syrian government in return for them accepting Palestinian refugees. And of course, it is a very dangerous place for sure, especially for people who are not adherents of extreme radical Sunni Islam. So we don't know. There's a lot of reports. It's nothing concrete, except that the Trump administration is on board with the Israeli idea of cleaning out all or part of the Palestinian population of Gaza. And whether that will happen or not, nobody knows.
Okay, last comment, Mike.
Yeah, just a quick one. I noticed recently, well, not too recent, but Ehud Olmert and a fellow named Nasser al-Kidwa, who was the foreign minister under the Palestinian Authority, they're no longer, neither are active in their representative institutions right now, but they actually were given very good interviews on the Amanpour show and on the Fareed Zakaria show about 3 months ago. And I'm just curious, any thoughts, or have you ever heard that perhaps they might start a different party or maybe join with the Meretz party or something like that? It just, obviously, like you say, that stuff never seems to bubble to the top, but I thought that was a brilliant, wonderful opportunity. And I appreciated the fact that those two mainstream media outlets actually gave them a good shot at discussing their points of view, because they were against, basically they are looking at a Palestinian entity or administrative entity of some type on the way to a state. And it just seemed like a radically different item that was not really explored very much after that. I'm just curious if you heard anything.
I haven't seen that, but it's worth noting that the purported left wing of Zionism in Israel, Meretz and the Labor Party, are all in with this war, and the differences are tactical and not principled. And the other opposition candidates are also, the so-called Democratic opposition is also all in with this war. And there's pretty widespread unanimity in Israel that Gaza has to be wiped out in one way or another, politically or physically. And the opposition, the serious opposition, is very fringe, and they are non-Zionists or anti-Zionists, and they are more fringy in Israel than they are here.